my hope is that we're being woken up to a new resensitizing to our creative selves and to the things that we want out of the creative world. And maybe in that way, there is some sort of revolution within it.
Hello, and welcome back to 5 a.m. Story Talk, a place to talk about stories in all their forms, the craft that goes into them, and the role that art plays in our lives. I'm Cole Haddon, and today I'm going to be joined by Amber Tamblyn, actress, writer, director, author, poet, activist, and all around delightful, brilliant human being. But first, what's going on in your neck of the apocalypse? Jump into the comments when we're done here and let me know how the writing and the rest of life is going. I'd like to build a community here, similar to the one I've developed around my arts newsletter, 5 a.m. Story Talk, which you can find a link to in the show notes. So I do mean that. I can't reply to everything, of course. Life sometimes gets in the way. But hopefully listeners begin to interact and support each other too. Myself, I'm in one of those weird liminal spaces as a storyteller that tend to manifest in my life once every couple of years. Just a timing thing, really nothing more. One screenwriting project is wrapped up, another is due to start soon, but not quite yet. A spec pilot I wrote is being shared with producers in the UK right now, and a new fiction project is currently in a state of flux, like so much of the arts industry, right? I've tried to just spend the freed up creative time working on this podcast and my newsletter, but it's not the same thing as telling a story. So I think I'm going to dive into a couple of short stories I've been working on notes about for a while now. We'll see how that goes. I'll let you know. Okay, let's talk about my guest today. I've been a huge fan of hers for a while, which you'll hear me talk about at the top of the conversation. That's because Amber Tamblyn is one of those artists who can seemingly do anything, and do it fucking brilliantly too. You probably know her best as an actress. She starred in the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants films and Joan of Arcadia, and shown up in so many other film and TV series, including House, and more recently, the canceled too soon TV series Y: The Last Man. In fact, Y is how I was introduced to her. Eliza Eli Clark, the creator and showrunner of Y, thought we'd hit it off, and she wasn't wrong. On top of her acting work, Amber is a writer-director. Her debut film, Painted Black, adapted with Ed Doherty from the Janet Fitch novel, was released in 2016. She's an author of nonfiction and fiction books, including 2019's Era of Ignition, Coming of Age at a Time of Rage and Revolution, which we're going to talk a bit about in the context of what's happening in 2025. She's a poet, with multiple books of poetry out there, including Dark Sparkler from 2015, which we'll get into a bit. And if that wasn't enough, her writing has a habit of appearing in some of the biggest newspapers and magazines in the United States. She writes the Listening in the Dark Substack. She was a co-founder of the Time's Up nonprofit in the wake of the Me Too movement. And, hold on, let me take a breath. She's a longtime political and social activist who has never shied away from using her name, reputation, and time to try to make this world a better place. She's an inspiration. You can read more about all this in the show notes, where you'll find plenty of links, including to Amber's website and Substack. If you're wondering why I wanted her to join me for one of my artist-on-artist conversations here, I couldn't pick just one. All of them? Probably all of them. We're going to cover so many great, important subjects. But at the heart of this chat, I think, is what it's like being an artist, and being an artist in the 21st century in particular. Spoiler, it's fucking hard. What I was most excited to discover is that Amber is, in fact, as amazing as she seems whenever I've heard her talk or read her work. She and I had never met before, but had a long chat before I hit record, in which we discovered we share far more in common than I thought. In a lot of ways, it was like meeting a long-lost sister. By the time we got to the bonus episode conversation, in which she discusses Ridley Scott's 1985 film Legend, a seminal piece of art from her life, I had to force myself to stop laughing so much because I was afraid it would ruin the recording. Now, be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already, if you don't want to miss out on more of these conversations, and if you enjoyed this episode, your likes and shares are appreciated and immensely helpful to a new podcast like this one. Okay, enough beating around the bush. Let me introduce you to my new friend, a wonderful human being, and maybe my long-lost sister. Who knows? Amber Tamblyn. Thank you so much for being here today, Amber. This is incredibly exciting. I'm a real fan, but I think I'm also incredibly intimidated by the breadth of your work. You're one of those artists that just does so many things that I think you kind of make other artists look like they don't have enough ambition in their life. But I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you.
Thank you, Cole, for having me. I feel like also that I am an artist that looks at my own repertoire and I'm like, I also have feelings about my own self and my work from the past. So yeah,
Mm.
it's the artist's way. It's the real artist's way, not the book. It's the real artist's way. Self-loathing, self-inquisition, all of it.
Yes, I don't think any of us ever escape it. And I think that at least I've learned it doesn't matter how successful you are, it doesn't matter how many awards are on your shelf. You seem to still think and guess it all. You regret it all.
Oh, absolutely, without question. You know, that's the nature of what we are and what we do. That's the horrible truth of being an empath. Everyone who wants to be a writer or a producer or anyone who is a deeply feeling human artist, that's the other side of that coin.
It is a strange thing. I discuss this with others. The role of the artist is to experiment out
Mm.
loud publicly, which involves so much risk. That's part of the joy of it, the beauty of it, but it also means those regrets are more pronounced than they are for other people. An accountant works things out during that first year and they know how to be an accountant after that. And we spend 10, 20 years constantly evolving to maybe one day be a version of ourselves we don't hate.
Boy, that is very true. I think it's so hard, and given the global climate, politically and otherwise, I think it's also extremely hard to lean in the parts of yourselves that artistically flourish, the parts of yourself that need to be deeply imaginatively free because we are so confined by political pain and by cultural pain and by everything that I think the world is going through, things that feel both very much in our control and out of our control. For instance, I think the collective conscience around climate change and the suffering and pain of the literal world is really hard to grapple with as a writer, as an artist, when you're trying to create an imaginative one, an imaginary world. It's really hard to differentiate between those two things. And I think it's sometimes that lends itself to artists or writers. And then also sometimes it just freezes us and traps us in the moment of where we are. So I think a lot of people I know are trapped in the moment right now and trying to, especially here in the US, I think it's people are really trying to figure out what their existential path is beyond the political engagement and the social engagement and everything else.
That the idea of boxes being confined, labels, I wanted to ask because you seem to have transitioned from a period of being an actress to having no labels. It's almost like maybe the 21st century confronted you and you shattered a bit, but you threw off labels. And so I'm curious if you were conscious of that happening and maybe even what that has meant to you to be able to create not just an actor, not just as an author, a poet. There are so many things that you do.
Well, I think it all starts with the foundation. I had a foundation in a very bohemian household
Mm.
in Southern California with parents, a father who's a big Hollywood actor, Russ Tamblyn, who was in West Side Story and all these films in an era, the sort of golden age of the studio system of Hollywood, but who was also very much a part of the Seminole culture movement of the 1960s and was living in Topanga Canyon with Neil Young and Dennis Hopper and Dean Stockwell and all these, like, I would call them dorks of that era because to me they are, because I grew up with them, so they were not cool. They were dorks. And so I grew up around that. My mom was a musician and a school teacher. They came out of this world of the arts and education and curiosity and the complexity that meets in the middle of all of that. And so my experience growing up as a kid was primarily there was a lot of it. There was Hollywood, there was music, but the thing I remember the most, which is the most informative to me, was being around poets. And I would always describe myself as a poet first. I think most people, maybe not as much now, but know me as an actress. They know me from Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants or House or Joan of Arcadia or all these different things. But that was not the beginning piece of my story. It really was being around poets. It was around the Northern California Bay Area poets, Diane DePrima and Amiri Baraka and Jack Hirschman and Michael McClure and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Those are people who came through my living room all the time as a kid. They were not particularly, they just were like cool aunts or uncles or people that came through, and there was readings. It was so essentially, like in a very quintessential way, a bohemian household, in that I had extreme exposure to artists and artists' voices. And so I think in that way, I had this upbringing that was very much about one thing in the arts, about being a poet, about being all of this, but then also I happened to fall in because of probably my father's line of work, acting. So that opened up a second door. Most people think that's the first door, but that was actually the second door for me. And I did some school plays and stuff like that, and then was discovered, long story short, and ended up on a soap opera when I was a teenager, 11 to 17, and then went on from there to do a whole bunch of acting work. But you're right, I think I wanted to share that piece first because I think it's important to remember that I started in this duality. I started in a place that I think most performers do not start. Actually, I'm going to go further. I think all performers do not start there, save for maybe my father in a different way, which is that he started as an acrobat and then became an actor at a very young age. There's very few people that sort of had I think, a sense of experience or a spiritual center from that young of an age that was not connected just to the entertainment business. And so many kid actors, child actors end up like that becomes the dominant force in your life. And it was very much for me all the way up into my 20s, but writing was always a part of that. I mean, I had agents and managers who were constantly like coming to my poetry reading at the Greenway Court Theater in LA or the Bowery Club in New York, who were just like, why can't you just go to the chateau? Why do we have to come to this? Let's come to go to the chateau. Let me pull you out of a drug-induced coma in the chateau. Why do we come into a poetry reading? So in those ways, it was different. It just was different by way of life. So when you talk about having a life that is transcended these definitions, I think that's extremely true. And I'm constantly trying to be proud of myself and to give love to myself for the fact that I came out on the other side of child acting, which is a really hard thing to do. It's really hard. Even though it wasn't necessarily the dominant force, it was the most public force for so many years of my life. But being a poet and poetry is my center, my forever center.
I don't know anything about being an actor or child actor, but I do know about Hollywood's ability to get into your head and tell you you're supposed to be this thing because you're only as valuable to them as what you can make them, of course.
Yeah, that's right.
That is your currency. And so every time you want to be an artist on your terms, you're threatening that in some way, and they rebel.
I think what's so horrible sometimes about the industry too is just that you can also be truly the best artist, the best writer, have come up with the best thing. And as long as it financially fails and or otherwise fails in their eyes in some way, you are nothing to them. And that's a reality, So it's not even actually about the work sometimes. It's not even about the art sometimes. It's not even about the craft. It's about the other things. And it is so centrally capitalistic that it harms all the other parts of it.
So I'm going to apologize in advance for how long-winded this next question is. I think it needs a proper setup. I read your book, Era of Ignition, a few months after it was released, but my copy of it's still currently packed in one of about 15 boxes yet to be unpacked after a recent move. Your assistant sent me a PDF so I could brush up on it, and it was a very rough revisit for me because we're talking 2019 here, just before Biden's election. You define an era of ignition as an age when activism becomes direct action, when disagreement becomes dissension, when dissatisfaction becomes protest, when accusations become accountability, and when revolts become revolutions. And you specifically cited the conversations we had started to have about identity, race, gender. And I remember you're shouting with my inside voice, yes, when I read that. But 6 years later, Trump's in the White House and things seem bleaker than ever. And so I'm curious, where do you think we are as a culture at the moment? Is there still a cultural revolution coming, or are we all trapped in some kind of mutual suicide pact at this point? And most importantly, how are you surviving it all?
I think it's a great question. And I'll start simply by saying we can't unknow what we know. I'll start there. I think it would be wonderful for them, for the other side, to erase a lot of what's been done and to get rid of it. And they certainly are. They're working very hard to move history backwards. But it's interesting because I haven't read or thought about those words that you just said until you just said them for years. And they have a different context now, certainly, because so much of what we have been fighting for or have fought for has changed and will continue to change. But I think ultimately I'm not in the business of the piecemeal moments of just saying we went this far, we worked so hard, we had so much change, and now everything is being pushed back. It is and it isn't, you know? When I directed and adapted the feature film based on the book Painted Black by Jana Fitch, that was an era in our business, in the entertainment business in Hollywood, where I was always told to manage my expectations. Women did not really direct films. It was rare. It was much more rare. Women were just not behind the camera in television. Very rare. It happened, but it was rare. If you look now, we're in such a different dynamic with so many more women behind the camera, so many more people of color, so many marginalized voices being able to tell stories. It's not nearly enough what I think it should be, but it's different than what it was when I wrote those words. Those words were happening at a time when that was just beginning to happen. They were happening at a time when no woman, outside of Shirley Chisholm and Hillary Clinton had run for a major party ticket in the U.S. for the Democratic Party. Now we've had many women. We've had Elizabeth Warren. We've had Kamala Harris. Things are changing. They are small, and that's part of, I think, the pain that we are experiencing and the shifts that we are experiencing and the pullback that we are experiencing is because of some of that. And that was just in 2016, 17, 18, those years. Era of Ignition was written around 2017, 18, 19, in those years. Here we are, we're 5 years past that, and things have absolutely gone backwards. Roe v. Wade, there's so much more. But I do look at other parts of it and think we're winning in certain aspects. So it's a slow, hard push that really demands persistence and perseverance of a very particular kind. And while I hear those words that I wrote and feel saddened by some parts of them because I feel like we could have gotten a lot further in some regards, I still think that a lot has changed since that book was written. And we just can't unknow what we know. So it'll keep going forward. You can't unknow what we know about trans children and their reality in the world, and what a beautiful thing that is, to be accepted for who you are and to be to become your authentic self at such a young age and not be pulled into the vortex of bullshit of adults. How lucky and how wonderful and how beautiful. There's so much that is very scary to the world and to people. And so we can't unknow what we know. So those words, I think, echo some of that.
You use the word persistence, which is one of the notes I wrote down about so much of your work as well. That part of you as an artist that's intimidating is that you do seem to work on longer periods of time than most of us. You know, you can spend 6 years writing a book of poetry, and the effort that you put into getting a film made. And even now, when you're talking about this fight, the commitment to the arc of justice paying off in the long run, has that always been, was that something your parents baked into you? Is that something that life taught you after breaking you at some point?
No, I think that there was, I think that those are just parts of the fact of how long sometimes it takes to make something that is truly what you want it to be, what you have worked to make it to be in its biggest, most authentic self. Dark Sparkler was the sort of break. I'd published a couple poetry books before that, but Dark Sparkler really changed my life in many ways. It's a book about the lives and deaths of child star actresses, but it's also got a bunch of artwork by really complicated, complex male artists. David Lynch put a piece in there. Marilyn Manson has a piece in there. Marcel Dzama, Adrian Tamine, my father. Just complex male artists. And I was very curious to know what their artistic interpretation of my interpretations of the lives of these women would look like. Just sort of like a meta rabbit hole. That book took 7 years to be published, but it only really took maybe 4 years, 3 years to write. It went in and out of a lot of different stages and things, but also just because a lot of publishers thought, is this an art book or is this a poetry book? We don't know what the fuck this is. And so in that regard, it took a while because it really had to find the right home. So I think some works of art for me are like that. Painted Black took a long time to adapt and get made again because, speaking to the former, what we were talking about, I had so many financiers and people who just really didn't understand an adaptation of a book about a young man who kills himself, in which that young man doesn't exist, but it's about the two women he left behind. It didn't make sense to a lot of people. And those people primarily, respectfully, were men who were financiers. So when they don't see themselves in the film and they don't see their pain, that can be a hard sell. So that was hard. And again, a time when it was harder, I think, for a young woman who people previously had an understanding of as an actress or a writer. Like, it was a much smaller thing as a writer in the business. They would look at it and go, I don't know why we should invest in her. She hasn't directed a film before. That's different now. I mean, I think there's a lot of young women. There's women with no credibility whatsoever who've done nothing before, who just have an idea and they go and they make a great fucking movie. And every time I see that, even if I don't love their movie, I'm like, fuck yes, that is so great. And I'm so proud and I'm so excited for them. And I'm also like excited for their failures, for their wins, for everything in between, because I've wanted this chance for us for so long, for us to not necessarily have to be defined by the gender or who we've been, but to be able to say, yeah, I maybe don't have the experience, but look how fucking smart I am. Look at my ability to be able to learn on the fly in the way that many other people have. My longevity in a specific career, whatever that is. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of different things. This is an extremely long-winded answer
Okay.
to give, other than say, I feel a lot of emotions and feelings about the many versions of myself that I am.
Mm.
They are complex. They're wonderful. I am grateful and honored and feel very privileged to have all of them. And they also haunt me because they give no clear path. And sometimes I think for an artist, like, a clear path is better because our brains are just big, open attics waiting to be filled.
The opposite side of that is that I sometimes worry that clear vision is limiting, because in a time like this, or it's not as if the 21st century is the only terrible point in history. We've had many where it feels like the world's ending. This one feels quite extreme, but the sort of fractal nature of that emotional reaction to it, it's not necessarily appropriate to just one medium. That medium might not be able to service the artist's emotional need. And so in your case, to have a toolbox where you can go in 4 or 5 different directions to get that thing out, to exercise that
See, but
feeling.
and this is what I love about talking to other artists, is just that I feel the opposite in many ways. I wish I had one idea that I could stick with. And because I did, I think, for many years, and now I've got several that I know are very good, but they pull me in all different directions. And so it's become a much harder game of trying to hone in on one thing, hone in on the Dark Sparkler, hone in on Any Man, hone in on a film, hone in on Era of Ignition, on a memoir. And so I think that this is part of, again, the privilege of the burden of an artist. It's just about, it does take time. As we discussed, it takes a long time to create something. I'm in the middle right now of writing a second novel, so I'm like deep in the feelings of all of this. And it's really hard.
But with the novel, when you reach those slow patches, I wonder if the anxiety of something that's just happened in the news, you have an outlet on Substack, which protects the novel in some way. This is how I work. I just end up thinking, I don't want this piece of art to be poisoned by this thing. I'll go compartmentalize and shove it into this short story or this
Yeah.
essay. It's become a way to protect what I'm creating now. And I don't know if that's just because I've reached middle age and the world is so complicated once you get older. I mean, it's so clear when you're younger, but also with age, you realize there are good things about that clarity. But also it's overwhelming because you realize there is so much nuance. And now I find I need more outlets or the work
Yeah.
somehow suffers.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. I mean, I'm 41 now, and I think I definitely could benefit from, I mean, Substack has been, our newsletter has been such an amazing experience for me because it also allows me to just write without having to feel the load of everything else that I do in my life, artistically and creatively. So that is definitely true. But I do think that there is something about having a hard time being able to focus on some of the things that I normally could have just gone into a cave of my mind and gone there. You know, when the external world, as we were talking about, is so hard to deal with, it can be like a parallel impossibility to create an imaginative world that is equally as complicated when you're living the real one. That's my experience anyway. So I'm sort of in the center of all of it. And also, I think coming out on the other side of a worldwide pandemic and everything you read about in that book, Era of Ignition, finding your footing and finding your place in how you want to show up as an artist, but also as someone speaking truth to power, for lack of a better term. Although that's a very good term. It requires a lot when sometimes I just would like to sit at home with my daughter and look at her draw pictures. It's a lot of that.
Yes. No, I understand that all too well. Somehow the 21st century is maybe it's the immediacy of things like Substack, but also so much of our culture now that we can react so quickly. And maybe that's the distraction of it, where
I think it has been for years, actually. I was just talking to someone about that, exactly that, and the poison of social media. The great gift that it gave us to be able to connect with each other and be able to speak to things that in an immediate way, in a profoundly necessary way, but then also it just became the way in which we thought we could politically communicate. And if you weren't doing it that way, then you weren't doing it. And that's so deeply wrong. And I think before I became so ingrained with social media and especially Instagram, prior to Substack and creating a newsletter there. It just was my resistance came out in my art in a much better and more effective way. So I'm back to those terms and I'm back in the center of that, but it's still, nonetheless disorienting being an American.
Absolutely. Well, in that regard, how are you taking care of your mental health? Are you using Substack as a way to tend to that? I'm also curious, what are you doing to sort of fill up your cup of joy in these times? Are you watching your silly films at night, or are you destroying yourself with incredibly gritty, realistic dramas to just, dig the knife in deeper?
I feel like in the first Trump years, I was very much, I'll watch The Handmaid's Tale. And
Mm.
I mean, I had read the books and then watched the show. I was like, dear God, this is so real, as everyone would say. But no, I'm very much the opposite in a lot of ways now, where I'm trying to leave space as much as possible for love and curiosity and all the things that are, I think, I'm in tune with as an artist, instead of feeding my brain full of political podcasts. I mean, I could just go down that road for 1,000 hours. I am a full-on political junkie. I always have been since I was a teenager. I love it. I thrive it. I thrive for it. I am curious about it, about the power dynamics, about how to change things, how to move things. I think in another alternative life, I could have been some kind of politician, but God help me, I'm glad I'm not there, but for the grace of God go I, as they say. So, yeah, so I don't know, right now I'm watching a little bit of White Lotus. I'm texting Parker Posey about the very funny memes that I'm seeing about her. I think she's a genius, brilliant actress. And what else am I doing? Revisiting old films, things that I've loved, old books that I've loved. I'm rereading Ray Bradbury books. I'm rereading Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is one of my favorite books, which is also very deeply ingrained with the novel I'm writing.
Mm. I found I'm shifting toward watching more positive things, but
Yeah.
I'm having a strange experience of nostalgia at the moment.
Yes, me too.
But it's not, I don't want to watch my Terminator or anything like that. I am
No, no.
nostalgic. I'm nostalgic for TV in particular, but even films in which there's a world and characters I want to spend time with where community is at the center. So I'm rewatching ER. I'm almost done with the first season of that. I'm started
Oh,
Northern Exposure again. And it's amazing the degree to which it is helping my mental health, watching disparate people just functioning together, trying to make the world a better place.
I started rewatching Quantum Leap.
Yes,
I mean,
an excellent show.
yeah. There's a whole bunch of them, but I'm deeply with you. I think the nostalgia thing is extreme right now. I went on Etsy and I bought a BlackBerry phone, which I'm laughing at because I took it to a Verizon store and the guy was like, "What is this?" I'm like, he knew what it was, but he's like, "Well, what is this, like, in the terms of what do you want me to do with it?" And I was like, "Can I turn it on?" And he's like, "If it's 4G and above, yes." And I was like, "Okay, but there's no way to turn something on that's not 4G? There's just no way?" As I mentioned to you before the interview started, we recently got a landline in our house, and it has brought a kind of joy that is, I cannot even hardly describe it, because our 8-year-old daughter is discovering a phone. And when we first got it in, the guy came and put it in and plugged it, did all of the things, tested it, gave us the phone number. I put it on a bunch of Post-its and I put her aunt's phone number and 2 of her friends and mommy and daddy's numbers, all those things. And she picked up the phone and she goes, "Mommy, what's this? There's a weird noise." She held the phone to my ear and I said, "Oh, honey, that's a dial tone." She said, "What's a dial tone?" And I went, "Oh, God, here we are.
Mm.
Here we are. I'm 41. Here we are. What's a dial tone?" Like, I was like, I know what TikTok is. Like, I know what all the cool things are, but what's a dial tone? And my 8-year-old daughter had never heard a dial tone before and now is kind of beautifully, I'm watching her grapple with picking a phone up and pressing buttons that have numbers that she has to remember. She can't hit Siri or hit anything else, and then she has to learn how to say goodbye. That's like a whole thing in and of itself. She would just for the first few weeks, she would just hang up on people. My sister-in-law, her grandmother, my mom, David's mom. She just would hang up. And I was like, "Marlo, you have to say when you pick up the phone, you just say, 'Hi, this is Marlo. May I please speak to?'" Or, "Okay, bye, Grammy." All those things. So nostalgia. It's deep in my mind right now.
I'm finding, and I think it's probably going to be true for you too, the nostalgia reflects how much we've broken things with ease.
Mm.
And I think technology, which is you're tied up in ease, but everything is fractured in some way. And that impacts your creativity. You're having trouble focusing on one thing because there are so many outlets. All of these things that the television we're nostalgic for is almost always the television that we shared with every other human being we knew. It always, for me, comes back to the fact that I think we're nostalgic for community. And I think the world broke that, whether that was social media, whether it's how social media exacerbated things around the rise of Trump and this fascism craze. But I miss sharing things with other human beings. And that makes me sad.
Yeah. And yet here we are sharing things.
Even when I emailed you about this podcast, that's part of my reason for doing it and not doing sort of the sexy podcast trying to grab listeners. I just want to have really simple
Conversation.
conversations. Yeah, conversations.
How dare you, Cole?
Yes.
How dare you? Oh,
I
Lord.
wanted to return to the idea of revolution through art because I don't think I've been as successful as you as using my art to sort of provoke and confront the world. I was limited, I think, by an early career in Hollywood where you weren't really allowed to do that, doing what I was doing. But you're reacting. You're being a vital artist, using your voice, I think, in the most admirable way. Historically, times like these created creative revolutions. And I'm increasingly worried that social media, the way that we even deliver things, movie theaters are a broken experience compared to our childhoods. Streaming, there are 500 choices just domestically before you inject 2,000 other TV series from around the globe every year for people to watch. Is it possible we can no longer achieve creative revolutions because there's no way to disseminate art in a universal way? It's just something I've been mulling lately.
For sure. Again, I think I'll go back to the refrain that we can't unknow what we know. And I think the fact that both you and I, who don't know each other at all, are tonight talking about nostalgia to some degree and the importance of that. And that we're both coming to that in our own way, and that there's a real feeling. I know that so many people have returned back to movie theaters here in New York. I know we're in New York. That's not that exciting. I think that there is globally a sort of sense of trying to return to a tangibility, something that feels palpable and touchable and real in the midst of a massive AI influx new world. So we are seeing these sort of two things converge, and there is a reason that we are being pulled to feel more connected to community. I started my newsletter 2 years ago, right after the pandemic sort of ended slash never really
Mm.
fully ended. We just never really acknowledged it. But at that moment, having hundreds of thousands of followers on social media was like, what is the point of this? It is dumb. It is meaningless. And I want to be able to write things and feel things and talk to people. And I was not alone in that. And I think that the pandemic really did that to a lot of people. So my hope is that we're being woken up to a new resensitizing to our creative selves and to the things that we want out of the creative world. And maybe in that way, there is some sort of revolution within it.
I've begun to think it's possible the revolution is in intimacy. Uh, that that maybe we've been so consumed with how do you have that $1 billion box office weekend when the reality is that the changes perhaps are more incremental today than they were 25 years ago, but maybe there's more power in that this need to communicate, this need to have authentic experiences, and how we begin to distrust them, the larger they are. But I'm hoping intimacy is the future.
That's actually a great t-shirt. Let's make it. Cole, that's the offshoot of this podcast. Intimacy is the future. I'll wear it. I'll wear it and I'll post it on my social media. Let's bring it full circle.
So we're going to be back in a moment to talk about Legend, a seminal film in your life. But first, one last question. What was the last beautiful thing you encountered that reminded you the world, as fucking ugly as it can get, is still worth fighting for?
Oh, I will tell you right now, because a friend of mine, a brilliant writer, my friend Priya Parker, who wrote The Art of Gathering and is just a really brilliant person, gave me a 5-year journal. I don't know if you know what these are. They're like,
No.
it's just a little journal, and it goes through 5 years of your life. But each year is marked on different levels of the page, so that once you get through the first year, as you start to write your journal entry, which is only a few small lines, you see the exact day the year before that. And then as you get to the third year, you'll see the 2 years before that, the exact day. It's brilliant. And it gives you sort of a sense of life and where you were and where you are and what you've wanted. And I love it so much. Anyway, I bring it up to say that the other night I wrote something down, and that was the last real, maybe 3 nights ago. My husband's a stand-up comedian. His name's David Cross, and he's on a big stand-up tour. He has been for several months, which can feel make you feel sort of very alone, and it's hard. I'm home alone with our daughter, and for the most part, and I was having a tough day, and when I was putting her to bed, she started singing me a lullaby out of nowhere. She's 8 years old, and she was singing me a lullaby that was something like, it was in the tune of now we say na 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 na, good night, sleep tight. But it was about something about mommy, sleep so tight, go to sleep, tomorrow morning we'll do it again. Those were the words. And she kept saying it over, and I just was laying there in her bed. And my daughter has a really beautiful, sweet voice, but I just thought she wasn't doing it to impress me or anything. She just was singing this song. And I kept hearing, we'll do it again tomorrow. We'll do it again tomorrow. And something about that, when I left the room, filled me with so many feelings, because that's true. Whether you're 8 years old or whether you're 41 years old. We'll do it again tomorrow. Sleep tight, because we're going to do it again tomorrow.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. As for you listening, wherever you are, thank you for being here, truly. But don't go just yet. There's a bonus episode you won't want to miss. In it, Amber and I continue our conversation, this time digging into a critical scene from a seminal piece of art in her life, Ridley Scott's 1985 film, Legend. We're going to talk Dancing with Evil, Tom Cruise, unicorns, story versus vibes, tangerine dreams, and one of the scariest monsters ever put on screen, in between laughing our asses off. You're going to need to become a paid subscriber wherever you're listening to this, though. Sorry, but these podcasts take a lot of work, and I can't produce them without your support. Alternatively, you can head to the show notes and subscribe to my 5 a.m. Story Talk Arts newsletter, where you'll get access to all my podcast episodes days, weeks, and sometimes even months early. You'll also get access to hundreds of arts articles, most of them focused on screenwriting and writing, many of them exclusive to paid subscribers, as well as the opportunity to join me for monthly Ask Me Anything About the Arts chats to hopefully help you with whatever you're struggling with as a creator at the moment. Upcoming guests of this podcast include Wicked Parts 1 and 2 screenwriter Dana Fox, Ready or Not directors Radio Silence, epidemiologist and director of UCLA's Center for Global and Immigrant Health, Dr. Anne Rimoin, and Lee screenwriter Liz Hanna. Thanks again for listening, my friends. I look forward to growing 5 a.m. Story Talk with your help. Hopefully, I'll see you at the bonus episode for some more conversation with Amber Tamblyn, this time about one of the craziest fucking fantasy films of the 1980s, Ridley Scott's Legend.